Want to know how to use past paper trends and analysis to help your students revise smarter and not necessarily just harder, although they obviously need to revise hard too? Well, in today's episode, I'm going to be walking through the most commonly assessed topics for AQA A-Level Biology and how I'd use this data to plan a high impact series of revision lessons. So whether you're looking to guide your students' independent revision or design targeted retrieval quizzes, I've got you covered in today's episode. Hey there teachers, welcome to Miss Estruch Teach and Tell, the podcast where every week I dive into all the tips and tricks that make teaching life so much easier. Whether you're a veteran educator, an early career teacher learning the ropes, or balancing the classroom with being a busy parent, this will help you streamline your workload and bring a bit more balance to your life. You bring the coffee and I'll bring the teach and tell. Hey everyone, and welcome to Miss Estruch Teach and Tell, the podcast designed to help busy and overwhelmed teachers streamline their workload and reclaim their evenings. I'm your host, Miss Estruch, and every single week I share practical strategies to save you time and help you focus on what truly matters, which is teaching effectively whilst maintaining your sanity. Okay, quick coffee catch up. First of all, I'm incredibly anxious about having a coffee while wearing this jumper. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm in white, like a really white jumper. And if you're someone that's ever worked with me, you know I'm one of the clumsiest people ever, and I always spill stuff down myself. So I rarely wear white, which I have done more often now, but I rarely wear it because I just ruin everything. So let's see how this goes, whether by the end of this episode I'm covered in coffee or not. But anyway, how has this week been? I did my last CPD session for teachers online. It was the free online series I did. I had one on ChatGPT for teachers, streamlining your workload, and the most recent one and the final one was teaching the AQA essay, which if you listened to last week's episode, you'd have known all about that. Now, if you did miss these and you didn't realise they were going on, you can actually watch the first two still on my YouTube channel. The essay one you can't, but the other two are on my YouTube channel that you can watch for free. Okay, let's get into the main content for today, and we're talking about how you can use past paper analysis to make strategic revision recommendations for your students and also inform your own revision lessons. So that means you can make highly informed decisions on which topics to focus on, partly based on what you know your students' strengths and weaknesses are, but also based on real exam data. So step one then is going through all of the past papers and identifying what are the most commonly assessed topics for paper one, paper two, and then just generally overall as well. Now, no one can accurately predict the exact questions that are going to come up, but by doing past paper analysis, it does help us to make more informed recommendations to the students. So you could go through every single paper one, paper two, paper three, and on a spreadsheet record down for each paper how many marks were for every single spec point. Or if you don't like the sound of doing that, I have actually done that already for every single AQA and actually for every single OCR exam paper as well, and I've got that as a spreadsheet. So if you are interested in that, I'm going to be talking about that a little bit later on in the quick win, so I'll come back to that spreadsheet shortly. But I'm going to share some of my findings from doing this analysis of every single past paper, breaking it down to look at which topics are the most frequently assessed topics for the different papers. So paper one, here were my findings for AQA A-Level Biology. So for topics 1 to 4, paper one for AQA, proteins has come up 88% of the time, cell structure 63%, gas exchange is 88%, and that does cover in humans, plants, fish, terrestrial insects. Mass transport 81% of the time, but that is mass transport in animals and mass transport in plants, which is a vast amount of the specification, so it's not really pinpointing literally the areas, but mass transport. And then lastly, genetic diversity and adaptations has also come up 88% of the time. Now this is looking at paper one specifically. So for paper one, those are the 5 most commonly assessed topics for AQA A-Level Biology. And if you're watching on YouTube, this is my cat's tail if you're wondering, what on earth is that? So let's start then by looking at which topics are the most commonly assessed topics for paper one. So number 1 on the list is carbohydrates. And this has actually come up 100% of the time. Carbohydrates in some form or another has been on every paper one. It doesn't necessarily feature heavily, but it has come up at some point. Proteins has come up 88% of the time on paper one. The next two are actually lower down on the ranking, even though it's 75% of the time. That's one of the lower percentages out of these big hitters, and that is mitosis in the cell cycle and transport across membranes. The next one, which is a big featuring one, 88% of the time, immunity has come up. Gas exchange has come up 88% of the time, and that is either gas exchange in humans, fish, plants, terrestrial insects. Mass transport, 88% of the time, but that is mass transport in animals and in plants. And then another one, 88% of the time, is genetic diversity. So that's linking to meiosis and mutations. Another two just to mention that are at the 75% band are DNA, genes and chromosomes from topic 4 and genetic diversity and adaptations from topic 4. But in summary, the ones that have come up over 88% of the time are carbohydrates, proteins, immunity, gas exchange, mass transport in plants, and genetic diversity. So those 6 topics, which is quite a lot, but there are actually 23 spec points that could be covered for paper 1. So next then, let's move on to paper 2. 88% of the time, nervous coordination has been assessed. 88% of the time, homeostasis has. 88% of the time, inheritance has been assessed. I'm actually surprised it's not higher. I thought inheritance has been on basically every test for paper 2, but actually 88%. Perhaps it's because when it's not on paper 2, it's on paper 3. And then 88% of the time as well, gene technologies. There are 3 worth mentioning that come up 75% of the time, and that is gene expression, populations and ecosystems, and evolution may lead to speciation in terms of the literal spec point names. Now, you might be quite surprised that respiration and photosynthesis weren't on that list, but the reason is photosynthesis has come up 63% of the time, respiration has come up 50% of the time, and this is on paper 2, and I think it's because they tend to focus on one or the other. So they are always assessed either photosynthesis or respiration, but it's one or the other. So you may look at 2024, have a look to see what came up last year more as a focus, and perhaps that'll mean the other one will be a bigger focus this year. Also though, whatever isn't assessed on paper 2 out of those 2 is often on paper 3. So I'd always say those 2 are really important ones to look at. And then lastly, let's have a look at paper 3. The percentages are generally a bit lower and more equally spread for this one. So one of the highest percentages in terms of times it's been assessed on paper 3 is mass transport. So that's come up as really popular on paper 3 and paper 1, and that is 75% of the time. The next highest is 63% of the time, and that is immunity. Then after that, the next highest percentages are 50%. So half the time proteins has been assessed. Half the time nutrient cycles has been assessed on paper 3. And those are the most commonly assessed topics for paper 3, not including the essay. And that is the big emphasis there, because the essay obviously could cover a whole range of different spec points. So those are the most commonly assessed topics, but let's look at then what that actually means for teachers and how we can use that information. So number 1 is making your students aware of that information. Making them aware, first of all, by telling them these are the most commonly assessed topics. However, I would heavily emphasize that although historically those have been commonly assessed, that doesn't mean they're guaranteed to come up this year. And also, other topics are always assessed. It doesn't mean the entire paper is just those topics. So still revise everything, but when you're planning your revision timetable, maybe make sure those topics are interleaved into your revision more frequently, especially if it's one of the topics that you are less confident on. So that's step number 1. Make the students aware so they can make some informed choices about their revision schedules. Number 2, the way that I would use this is if you happen to have any leftover time at the end for revision lessons. Now, I personally always focus those on skills, but when I'm teaching or revising the application or critical analysis or essay, I try to link it to topics I think they're going to find harder. So what you could do is if you are teaching a skills lesson for revision, or if you're just doing practice exam questions for revision, base it on some of those topics. Or if you have the time to do a revision lesson that is theory based, or maybe that is what's going to benefit your students more, for, then maybe pick one of those topics to look at that is commonly assessed and you know they find hard to do. And then number 3, the way that I would use this is in my retrieval quizzes as starters or plenary quizzes. Whether you finish teaching the content or not, and whether it links to that lesson or not, by the time I've got to this point in year 13, or even earlier, I actually think it's really beneficial to do a starter or a plenary that isn't necessarily directly linked to the lesson, because you're now building in retrieval practice that is going back to old topics that they might have forgotten about and might not have been revising about. So by you doing it as your starter, it's a little standalone little mini quiz, which is going to be low threat. There's no big consequence for if they don't do well, but it will help them to think about that topic again, see how well they remembered it, and improve their long-term memory. So I would think about those topics we've just listed, start to have some of those as little retrieval activities in random starters or random plenaries in your lessons from now on. And I'm going to come back to that concept for my free resource roundup of the week as well. So wait for the end for that concept. So that's the most commonly assessed topics and what I would do with that information. And as I said, I had a quick win of the week that I wanted to share with you. If you want to save time and delve deeper into that past paper analysis without having to personally analyze all the papers yourself, I have actually done that, and I do make this accessible for teachers only. The reason I don't allow students to have it is not because I don't want them to have that information, but I actually have my membership, the Biology Study Club, and the student members of the Biology Study Club get that as a freebie. So I don't think I should then offer it to other students to be able to purchase. But because teachers aren't going to be a member of my Biology Study Club, and I do think it would provide a lot of value for them, I do make that available for teachers to purchase. So if you are interested in just using the copy that I've already created, then email me at missestruch@gmail.com and I can arrange to get that sent over to you, so you can then have a look at the clear breakdown of the trends which came up in the most recent years, 2023, 2024, to help you inform your final months of lessons with your year 13s, or if you then want to share it with your students, then you can. The resource roundup of the week then. This week's free resource is I've created a 2-page PDF which has 10 effective starters and plenary activities that you can use to apply this idea of high frequency, low threat testing linked to those topics. So if you want to get a list of 10 activities, so it's not just always literally a short quiz, then you can click the link in the show notes or the YouTube description to download those 10 ideas for free. So that is it for today's episode. I hope you found it helpful. Make sure you subscribe, and if you could leave a review or a comment, then that would be so helpful, because it makes this podcast more searchable for fellow teachers, so I can reach even more of you out there to help you. If you did find today helpful as well, make sure you listen next week, because it's going to be a follow-on from today's episode. But that is it for today. I'll see you next week. I hope you bring the coffee and I'll bring the teach and tell.